around 2030, there's going to be a Great Depression.
The year 2030, I think, is very significant. And then when you look at who designed these institutions, who designed these policies, the fact that an economic crisis of enormous proportions is baked into the cake should be obvious to everybody.
ITR Economics, they're the oldest privately owned macroeconomics firm in the country. They have a 94.7% accuracy rate. They post whether they're right or wrong online. They own it if they're wrong. But they've been saying since 2014 that around 2030, there's going to be a Great Depression. Does your time frame at all line up with that 2030 year?
Well, the year 2030 is very significant for a number of reasons. And so I think there's, beyond just the economic data that we can all look at, there's a lot of other evidence that strongly suggests something big is coming on or before 2030. I'll point people first and foremost to the World Economic Forum. A few years ago, they put out their famous list of predictions that by 2030, these things would happen. And the very first one on there was that you would own nothing and would be happy. I'm not sure about where they get the happy idea from, but the whole concept of owning nothing actually lines up very well with what we know some of these deep state operatives want. And so I covered them extensively in my upcoming book, Deep State 2.0. You know, the World Economic Forum is not just a talk shop. These are some of the most powerful economic players in the world, powerful government officials in the world. And when they talk about predictions, they shouldn't be thought of so much as just predictions, like, oh, we're just looking at trends and forecasting what's going to come. I think a better way to think of it is kind of a wish list. And they've got very smart people like who do this for a living. And one of the things that they work on is coming up with different plausible scenarios for where things could go. And then with those plausible scenarios, they try to steer things toward the outcome that they want. And so I think the fact that an economic crisis of enormous proportions is baked into the cake should be obvious to everybody. The debt that you were just talking about, the issue with the dollar continually losing its purchasing power. The massive amounts, not just of government debt, but personal debt and corporate debt and municipal debt. I mean, we're facing multiple crises happening at the same time. And so with those crises already baked into the cake, these people at the World Economic Forum are figuring, well, what do we want to do with this crisis? And they understand, of course, that crises are good opportunities. As Rahm Emanuel said, former chief of staff to Barack Obama, former mayor of Chicago, these are opportunities to do things that you couldn't do before, like maybe take people's stuff. And so I think the year 2030, I think, is very significant. And then when you look at who designed these institutions, who designed these policies, some very suspicious characters come up. Obviously, William Denzel, who set up the DTC, the Depository Trust Company that holds all these securities, is a very suspicious individual. His background was, of course, with the Central Intelligence Agency. After the CIA, he went and started the USAID, which was basically a front for the Central Intelligence Agency. And then he gets appointed by a Rockefeller. Remember that name, because these people have their fingers in every pie. Gets appointed by a Rockefeller, the governor of New York, to a very, very prominent position in banking and regulation. And from there, he uses that as a springboard to then become the key player in designing this whole system that we're talking about, the DTC, the stocks in pooled form, and all the rest of it. So I think when you look at where they're going with this, we've got a lot of strong clues about it. One book that I think is really important for people who want to try to understand this, it's called Tragedy and Hope, A History of the World in Our Time. It was written by a professor at Georgetown University, a professor of history, and he brags in the book that he's been close to the deep state all his life, that he has good relationships with these people, that they even allowed him to look at their secret papers for a period of a few years. And he says, I agree with their goals. He says, my chief difference of opinion is that they want to be secret, and I think their role in history is so important that they ought to be known to the public. And so he writes these books and kind of burns his bridges. They get really mad at him. But one of the things that he describes as their overarching objective in this book is the creation of a global political and economic system that he says would be based on the feudalist model. And if you remember the feudalist model from 8th grade civics or history, whatever, it is you own nothing. I don't know if you're gonna be happy or not, but basically your overlords own everything, and they might allow you to occupy a little piece of farmland as long as you hand over 50% of your crops and you hand over your children when the king needs them to go off to a war, but you ultimately own nothing. You are a serf. And I think this neo-feudalistic model that they're building has that as the end objective. all the resources of the world, the stocks, the bonds, the productive assets of the world, and of course the natural resources as well, all concentrated into a tiny group of hands. And so in this book, Carroll Quigley gives a lot of the mechanics of how they're going to do this. He gives a lot of the people involved, a lot of the institutions. He mocks the idea of two different parties in the political process representing opposite ideals. He said they ought to be so close to each other that we can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound shifts in policy. And when you read this book, and this was published back in the 1960s, you get a real sense of where these people want to take the system, where the people who appointed William Denzel to create the DTC want to have this all end up. And it really does look like the year 2030 is going to be a major year. It's also the year that the UN 2030 Agenda Sustainable Development Goals, which the UN called the Master Plan for Humanity, officially expires, to be replaced by what I'm hearing from my sources is going to be the resilience goals. And so why would you need resilience? Well, because you're facing what the World Economic Forum has described as a polycrisis. It's not just the economic crisis, but all these other crises, geopolitical, maybe civil unrest, environmental concerns, all converging into this super polycrisis that the World Economic Forum says is coming, and would be perfect cover for basically looting humanity's assets.